I asked the hotel receptionist to take my wedding ring to her and her lover's room. With every second that passed, I felt the weight of the cold metal on my fingers, almost as if this ring, once a symbol of love, was now burning my skin. That same symbol, which had once been a source of pride, was now evidence of a hoax. The receptionist took the ring and disappeared down the hall, and, for a moment, I imagined her face when she saw the ring appear in that scene of betrayal. My stomach was churning. Would she be able to understand the extent of what she had done? Or would she try to convince me of some cheap excuse, some lie that she believed could mend what was in pieces? Hours before, I didn't know anything. My world felt unbreakable. We went out to dinner, talked about the future, laughed as if we were the most solid couple in the world. But after what I heard, an unassuming whisper, a sentence leaked between the thin walls of the restaurant, reality began to unravel. Those words brought me a vision that I couldn't ignore. I decided to follow her, already overcome by a bitter feeling that was spreading like poison. I, who have always been faithful, have always believed in us. And there I was, in a hotel hallway, breathing deeply, trying to contain the urge to break down the door and confront them right there. Instead, I chose something quieter, more deadly. The ring, a simple gesture, but with the weight of a sentence. As the receptionist walked back, he shot me a look. It was one of those looks that said it all without needing words, pity, perhaps even admiration for the courage of a man who was about to expose betrayal in such a calculated way. The heavy silence of the hotel seemed to amplify my thoughts. I could almost hear her breathing as she received the ring, an echo of the past now transformed into pain. I imagined the exact moment the ring would fall into the palm of his hand. I wanted to see her reaction, to feel the shock she would feel when she realized that her mask had fallen, that I knew. As I turned my back, I began to feel the weight of the moment, a mix of despair and a strange sense of power. This was the same woman with whom I shared laughs, secrets, promises of eternity. Every memory now turned into a knife that swirled inside me. I remembered the nights I spent waiting for her, the times I wanted to surprise her, how much I gave up for what I believed to be true love. Still with my fists clenched, I found myself alone, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions that ranged from anger to the desire for subtle but definitive revenge. I wondered if she would try to explain herself, if she would dare face what had just happened. And him? Would he stay by her side or disappear as soon as the situation became untenable? The receptionist stopped in front of me, still silent, as if calculating the impact of what he had witnessed. I looked at him with an air of approval, as if saying goodbye to an accomplice. I went back to my car, but the emptiness wouldn't budge. I wanted to feel relief, I wanted the hate and pain to be drained, but all that was left was a pulsing question that hammered my mind, questioning how something so solid could collapse in such a brutal way. I needed to understand why, but I knew that asking wouldn't yield real answers. No, the real answer lay in what she would do now, in what this clandestine meeting really meant for her. Driving back home, I felt every mile like a reminder of what I was missing. I knew that, when I walked through that door again, would be crossing the line between before and after. Welcome to our channel, where stories of betrayal are exposed bluntly. Here, we do not support any type of infidelity. All the stories are fictional, but they carry a powerful truth: betrayal destroys lives, bonds and dreams. Get ready for an intense and revealing journey. Now, sit back, because you're about to hear a shocking story. Night after night, Alex walked through the cozy, elegant space of the living room, where everything reflected the precision and refined taste he and Rachel had cultivated together over the years. Their marriage was not just a union, but a solid construction of plans and dreams that seemed, to anyone's eyes, unshakable. Each piece in that home represented a story, from the hand-picked furniture to the soft colors of the walls, which contrasted harmoniously with the frenetic pace of their lives. Alex was a practical man, always decisive and meticulous. In his career, he was recognized for his dedication that bordered on perfectionism, and in personal relationships, he valued absolute trust. His life seemed to be carefully organized, from work to relationships, from the sincere smile he offered to his friends to the loving looks he reserved for Rachel. He loved the silence in the house when Rachel was by his side. There was something serene about the way she moved through the room, always calm, leaving a sense of peace behind her. Rachel, in turn, was the perfect balance of lightness and intensity. Owner of a discreet beauty, she had a natural energy that attracted people, but it was with Alex that her smile was truer, revealing the complicity that united them. She always had a creative and explorative mind, characteristics that made her stand out as an admired professional and, in Alex's eyes, as the perfect wife. When they met, the bond between them was immediate. She liked his acid humor and his firmness, and he was enchanted by the sensitive and genuine way in which she saw the world. Little by little, they built a life that seemed impenetrable to the eyes of those who observed it. It was an ordinary afternoon when they decided, at her insistence, to go on a short weekend trip. Their intense routine rarely allowed them this break, but Rachel felt it was necessary for both of them. Alex, although hesitant at first, was convinced by Rachel's enthusiasm, who didn't hide how much she needed that breather to renew her energy. The chosen hotel, far from the urban hustle and bustle, brought the comfort and sophistication that she always appreciated. For her, that weekend meant the chance to relive the enchantment that, amidst her daily responsibilities, had ended up forgotten. That place, surrounded by nature and with the soft scent of lavender that permeated the environment, seemed like a perfect refuge. Alex allowed himself to relax and let herself be infected by her enthusiasm, as she, always smiling, commented on how the hotel reminded her of the place where they spent their honeymoon. Walking side by side through the corridors, the couple was the very definition of harmony and harmony. Dinner at the hotel restaurant that night was simple and delicious. The romantic atmosphere, with low lights and the soft sound of jazz in the background, provided an ideal atmosphere for them to enjoy each other's company without rushing. Alex noticed that Rachel was especially radiant. She smiled, looked at him with an intensity that reminded him of the first days they fell in love. The wine warmed his cheeks, and he allowed himself to let his guard down, exchanging sweet words with Rachel, who responded with a lightness that he hadn't seen in a long time. At that moment, there was nothing to suggest any kind of fissure in their relationship. There, sitting at that table, were just Alex and Rachel, husband and wife, sharing a moment of pure complicity. However, as he rambled on about what their time together meant, Rachel seemed to have thoughts that, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't completely hide. At times, while Alex looked at her tenderly, Rachel looked away, as if she were suddenly overcome by something uncomfortable that made her look at the floor or some undefined point. He, attentive as always, noticed her brief moments of distraction, but preferred to attribute it to the tiredness of the last few months. "Are you okay?" he asked, and she, forcing a smile, replied yes, running her hand through her hair in an automatic gesture that revealed a hint of anxiety. When dinner ended, Alex suggested that they return to the room to continue the night in a more intimate atmosphere. Rachel hesitated for a second, but accepted, holding his hand with a strength that he interpreted as a gesture of affection. As they walked together to the bedroom, he felt the weight of her hand in his, as if she wanted to anchor herself there, in something that perhaps only he could offer, security. In the room, they talked more about the future, about the plans they had and the places they still wanted to visit. For Alex, her every word felt like a reunion with the love that, despite the ups and downs, was always there. He believed that this weekend, as simple as it was, represented a new beginning, a rebirth for them. And deep down, Rachel wanted to believe that too. However, there was something in his expression that seemed to carry a greater weight than what his words showed. During the night, Rachel slept restlessly. Alex watched her as she tossed and turned in bed, as if some uncomfortable thought haunted her even in her rest. He got up and went to the window, where the moonlight illuminated the countryside around the hotel. He stayed there for a while, absorbing the calm of the place, while trying to understand what could be bothering his wife. It wasn't uncommon for her to worry too much about the little things, but something about that night made him think there was something beyond, something he still couldn't reach. The next morning, Rachel woke up before him, silent, as if lost in her own thoughts. She got dressed quickly and went for a walk without waking him up. When Alex got up and noticed her absence, he felt a strange feeling in his stomach, but was soon reassured when he found her outside, sitting on a bench, watching the lake in silence. He approached slowly and, upon noticing his presence, she looked at him with a smile, albeit distant. "Is everything okay?" he asked once again, trying to decipher her look. "Yes, of course, I was just here thinking about my life," she replied with a tone that he recognized as that of someone trying to reassure. He sat next to her and remained silent, trying to share her moment, but without asking any more questions. That would be their last day at the hotel, and Alex, determined to make the most of it, suggested a trip to the nearby city. They shopped in some local stores, laughed at some funny trinkets and took photos in front of historical monuments. For a moment, it seemed as if the world around them had dissipated, leaving just the two of them, free from any worries, renewing the silent vows they once made to each other. Back at the hotel, Rachel seemed lighter. They sat in front of the fireplace and drank wine, sharing the comfortable silence they always had. Alex watched her closely, pleased to see her smile like she did in their first years together. He felt that, finally, the barriers that seemed to grow between them were crumbling, that they were, in fact, resuming the connection they cherished so much. However, upon returning to his room to pack his bags, Alex felt a strange feeling of nostalgia mixed with a slight anxiety. He felt a weight, something he couldn't explain, but that compelled him to think about the transience of life, the fragility of relationships. He looked at Rachel, who was calmly folding a blouse, and felt a sudden urge to hold her, to tell her how much she meant to him. But something stopped him, as if a part of him knew that that moment was not the end of a story, but the beginning of something that would change their lives forever. With his heart divided between the security of an old love and the restlessness of a dark premonition, Alex looked at the room one last time, at the view from the window, and followed Rachel to the exit of the hotel, without knowing that this trip to the weekend would not only bring sweet memories, but would also leave deep marks that would define the fate of both. Alex returned home with a mixed feeling of relief and renewal. The weekend with Rachel seemed to have restored some of the lost intimacy between them, and, for the first time in months, he felt that something genuine was being rebuilt. However, he couldn't explain where that persistent feeling of restlessness that continued to haunt him came from. It was a kind of tension that was there, latent, waiting to reveal itself. Rachel, in turn, seemed determined to maintain the same light atmosphere they had experienced at the hotel. She showed special care in small gestures and seemed more present, as if she wanted to reaffirm the solidity that they both always believed they possessed. In the first few weeks after returning, Alex felt grateful for her dedication, thinking that her efforts were proof that the relationship was, in fact, reborn. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the feeling that Rachel was hiding something. It was as if every smile, no matter how authentic it seemed, carried a small shadow that Alex, always observant, couldn't help but notice. At random moments, she seemed to get lost in thought, as if carrying a guilt he couldn't identify. He tried to convince her to share what she was feeling, but every time he approached that kind of conversation, Rachel deflected it with careful skill, moving the subject to lighter topics. One night, while they were having dinner at home, Rachel's phone vibrated insistently. She quickly glanced at the screen and, with an expression that mixed concern and urgency, got up from the table with the excuse that she needed to resolve something quickly with work. Alex nodded, but watched as she walked away with her phone in her hand and a serious expression, disappearing outside the house. He could hear the muffled sound of her voice as she spoke, but he couldn't make out the words. After a few minutes, she returned, forcing a smile and apologizing for the inconvenience, claiming that she would resolve the matter quickly. "Is everything okay?" Alex asked, trying to catch some sign in her eyes. Yes, nothing to worry about," Rachel replied, a little hastily. To Alex, the answer seemed forced. He still remembered the averted glances, the hesitation in her voice at certain moments. Each detail became a piece of a puzzle that he was trying to put together, but which still seemed incomplete. Pushing these thoughts aside, he decided that perhaps he was just tired, blaming the increasing discomfort he felt on his own anxiety. But suspicions continued to worsen in the following days. He noticed that Rachel became more and more immersed in her cell phone, exchanging messages with an intensity that was unusual. Sometimes he saw her smiling discreetly at the screen, as if she were engaged in a personal conversation. Alex tried to ignore the possible implications, but the seed of doubt was already planted and gained strength with each new sign of distance from her. One afternoon, he decided to subtly confront her. In an attempt to avoid a conflict, he casually asked her if she would like to take some time off from work together, maybe plan a new trip to ease the routine. Rachel hesitated, and her face turned slightly pale. She thanked him for the invitation and, smiling, said that she preferred to focus on work for now. Alex, pretending not to notice, continued to smile, but felt an discomfort that was increasingly difficult to ignore. It was on a Wednesday night that the feeling of uneasiness turned into certainty. Rachel had left work early, saying she was going to an appointment with a friend. Alex was at home, trying to focus on daily tasks, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. Deciding to follow his instincts, he called Rachel's supposed friend. Hearing his friend's hesitant and confused tone on the phone, he immediately knew something was wrong. The friend mentioned that she didn't even know about this meeting and that, in fact, she hadn't seen Rachel in weeks. Feeling a knot in his stomach, Alex hung up the phone and remained silent for a few minutes, processing the discovery. He decided not to be hasty, there was a need to be sure before any confrontation. So that night, while Rachel was still out, Alex found a folder that held recent bank statements. It was an instinctive impulse, a desperate search for answers he feared he would find. His eyes scanned the transactions, until he found a sequence of expenses at a hotel near the city center, a place they had never been to together. Not knowing how to react, he closed the folder and took a deep breath, feeling the crushing weight of suspicion turn into near certainty. Something inside him begged him to be mistaken, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. Alex knew that confronting her right away could be hasty. He needed more, something concrete that would allow him not only to confirm his suspicions, but to fully understand what was going on. Determined to resolve the situation once and for all, Alex made the difficult decision to follow Rachel the next day. He left the house earlier than usual, claiming he had a last-minute meeting, but instead discreetly positioned himself in the vicinity of the hotel where transactions indicated she might be. The wait seemed like an eternity, but his determination to get answers kept him going. At the end of the afternoon, he saw her approaching, walking towards the hotel. Alex's heart was beating wildly, and he had to restrain himself from acting impulsively. Watching her enter the lobby, he waited a few minutes before heading the same way. He remained at a distance, but close enough to see the receptionist greet her with a familiar smile, indicating that this was not an occasional encounter. She chatted briefly with the clerk, who soon handed her a key, and Rachel disappeared through the hotel's hallways. Alex felt his hands shaking, sweat running down his forehead. He decided to wait outside, trying to remain calm. Every minute, he wondered how it was possible that the same woman he shared his life with was capable of betraying him in such a calculated way. Minutes passed, and he imagined that perhaps it was time to confront her, to face the truth once and for all, no matter how painful it was. After what seemed like an eternity, Alex saw Rachel come down the lobby, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her, a man smiled and exchanged complicit glances with her. They seemed so close, so connected, that Alex felt his world fall apart. Betrayal was no longer a possibility, it was a reality that hit him with the force of a devastating blow. Alex stood there, watching as the two left together, not noticing their presence. The mix of feelings that consumed him, anger, sadness, disappointment, seemed to swallow everything around him. He remained still, unable to fully process the scene he had just witnessed, as he felt a paralyzing coldness spread throughout his body. No matter how much his mind asked for explanations, there were no more doubts. The scene he had witnessed was clear, but what left him grounded was the intensity of the betrayal, the fact that Rachel, the woman he loved so much, was capable of hiding something so deep. He knew he needed to understand why, but he also recognized that any answer would never be enough to justify what she had done. With a heavy heart, Alex returned home in silence, determined to take definitive action. Alex was determined to face Rachel. The night he spent after seeing her with another man had been a whirlwind of emotions. It was as if every memory, every promise exchanged over the years, was being revisited with a different weight, under the shadow of an irreversible betrayal. Now, with dawn bringing a faint light, he felt a cold, determined calm. There was no turning back. I needed to hear the truth from her mouth. When she arrived home, she avoided his gaze, maintaining the same anxious expression that had made him suspicious in the previous days. Alex waited for her to enter and closed the door, his gaze firmly fixed in her direction. Rachel stopped, noticing the seriousness on her husband's face, and for the first time in a long time, an almost palpable silence enveloped them. "Rachel," he began, keeping his voice controlled even though his breathing betrayed his nervousness. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Rachel hesitated, her face showing surprise mixed with a touch of fear. She tried to hide it with a weak smile, but Alex's attentive gaze left no room for escape. I knew he was waiting for an explanation, and that the vague excuses he had used up until then would no longer be enough. "Alex, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you know?" he repeated, containing the frustration that boiled in his words. "I know where you were yesterday. I saw you and him." Rachel gasped, her face turning pale. His expression of astonishment turned to despair as he tried, in vain, to maintain his composure. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out, as if she had lost the ability to find words. Feeling exposed, she sat on the sofa, putting her hands on her head, in a gesture of total surrender. "Alex, I'm sorry, please." His voice came out in a whisper, barely audible. "I never wanted you to find out like this." Alex approached, trying to contain his anger, but unable to hide the pain that took over him. "So, it was true. All those dates, all the times you said you needed time for yourself. It was him, all the time." She nodded, unable to look at him. "Yes," he murmured, his voice breaking. "But, Alex, that was a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking." "A mistake?" His voice rose slightly, filled with bitterness. "Rachel, we built a life together. I was there, by your side, trusting you, while you were with him. Please listen to me, Alex," she begged, her eyes finally meeting his, filled with tears. "I made a mistake, I know that, but it wasn't something. It wasn't what I really wanted. I was confused, stuck in something I couldn't understand. You need to believe that it doesn't mean I don't love you." Alex laughed, a bitter, desolate laugh. "Don't you? Rachel, how can you say you love me and still do that? Didn't you realize what you were destroying? Or did you just think I'd never find out?" She remained silent, her head bowed, and tears began to roll down her face. Alex, who had stood her ground until then, felt a pang of sadness mixed with a growing bitterness. I just wanted to know why," he said finally, his voice softer but still thick with hurt. "What did I do to make you do this?" She sighed, trying to find the words. "It's not about what you did, Alex. It was something that something in me was getting lost. I didn't know how to tell you, how to explain. And suddenly, I found myself reaching for something that didn't make sense, but it seemed like a way to reconnect with myself, to feel alive." Alex shook his head, disappointed. "So, to feel alive, you destroyed everything we built? Rachel, if there was something wrong, if you felt lost, why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you trust me?" She looked up at him, the expression of deep, sincere guilt. "I thought I could solve it on my own. I thought it was something mine, something I didn't want to involve you in. But I ended up getting too involved, and when I realized it, I was already stuck in it." He took a deep breath, trying to assimilate what he heard. "And you think that justifies what you did?" "No," she admitted, now without any defense, just the raw pain in her voice. "It doesn't justify it. I know it doesn't. But I'm here, asking you for forgiveness. I know I made a mistake, and I don't expect you to forgive me so easily. I just wanted you to understand how sorry I am." Alex looked at her for a long moment, the turbulent emotions in his chest seeming to contradict everything he'd ever believed about love, trust, and commitment. He stood up slowly, unable to bear her presence any longer at that moment, needing air, space to process everything he had just heard. As he walked to the door, a cold, calculated idea began to form in his mind, a thought that made him question himself but that he couldn't help. There was one last thing he needed to do, something that would bring the full truth to the surface. "I'm going out," he said, avoiding her gaze. "But I want you to think very carefully about all this. And when I come back, I want you to tell me the whole truth. Don't hide anything anymore." Rachel nodded silently and watched him leave, with a heavy heart and a growing sense of despair. She knew that, regardless of their apologies, their bond had been broken, perhaps irreparably. Later that night, Alex returned home. Without saying a word, he entered the room and saw that Rachel was waiting for him, sitting on the edge of the bed, as if she was waiting for the final sentence. He approached, his gaze fixed and determined, and, after a few seconds of silence, he asked, "Rachel, where is the ring you wore at the hotel? What happened to it?" She shivered, surprised by the question, and avoided his gaze. "Ring? I don't know what you're talking about." "You know exactly what I'm talking about," he insisted, his voice cold. "I left you something there. And I want to know what you did with it." Rachel sighed, her face etched with fear. "Alex, you know what that ring means to me. I couldn't look at it, I couldn't." "So you rejected him," he murmured, bitterness evident in his voice. "Maybe that's the difference between us, Rachel. I gave you my trust, my life, and you rejected it all." She looked at him, her eyes shining with tears she couldn't hold back. "Please, Alex, this isn't the end for us. We can get through this. I just need you to give me a chance." He shook his head, slowly, as if making a final decision. "I've given you too many chances, Rachel. I've tried to see the best in you, but this has all made me realize that maybe I was just fooling myself." Those words seemed to tear her apart. Feeling defeated, Rachel hung her head, aware that perhaps there was nothing more that could be done. The weight of betrayal and wrong choices fell on her with the force of a storm she herself had unleashed, and now all that was left was the devastating silence between them. That night hung like a heavy fog in Alex and Rachel's house, and the conversation they had left an echo of pain in the room. Alex, now aware of everything, had moved away to try to understand the depth of his disappointment. He refused to sleep next to Rachel. Every detail of that room felt like a tortured reminder of what they had built together and, now, what was falling apart. Sitting on the sofa in the living room, he stared into space, lost in a whirlwind of emotions that prevented him from finding peace. Rachel remained in the room, but sleep did not come. Alex's harsh words still reverberated in her mind, and she felt the weight of the mistake and the pain she had caused. Guilt consumed her, but at the same time, she knew she needed to be strong. She had betrayed him, yes, but she also knew that she had, within herself, a real love for him, something that now seemed impossible to express without being tainted by the truth of what she had done. When the first ray of sunlight broke through the window, illuminating the room where Alex was, he knew that the decision he needed to make was inevitable. Even though he loved Rachel and had seen her for so long as his lifelong partner, the emotional break he felt was too deep to ignore. In an attempt to organize his thoughts, he went to his office, where he found a pen and paper. He wanted to write, perhaps to express what he felt, perhaps to record something that he himself needed to understand. Rachel heard his footsteps and went down to the living room. Seeing him there, sitting, writing in silence, left her in a state of nervousness that she couldn't disguise. He took a deep breath and, hesitantly, asked, "Alex, can we talk again?" He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze cold and distant, but he nodded. There was a need to clarify what came next, even if the conclusion was painful. She walked over and sat across from him, trying to muster the strength to find the right words, even though deep down she knew that nothing she said could undo what was already done. "Alex, I know nothing I say will change what happened," Rachel began, her voice shaking. "But I need you to know that I love you. That, even through all of this, you're still the person I always wanted to be with." He took a deep breath, his fingers pressing down on the pen he held, trying to contain the avalanche of feelings that threatened to surface. "Rachel, if you truly love me, how could you betray our history? How could you put me in this position, questioning everything we built together?" She lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. I don't know, Alex. Maybe it was fear. Fear of losing something I couldn't even explain, or an attempt to escape myself. But I never wanted you to be the one hurt in this story." He laughed, but without humor. "You knew this could destroy me, Rachel. There's no way around it. And the worst part is that you didn't have the courage to tell me. I was the one who had to find out, alone, like an intruder in my own life." The guilt weighed on her in an overwhelming way. "I wanted to tell you, but every time I tried, I couldn't. I knew that by doing so, I could end any hope of saving us once and for all." "Save?" Alex interrupted, feeling his face heat up with indignation. "You already made up your mind when you did what you did. Any chance of saving our marriage was already compromised." Rachel wiped away a lone tear that ran down her face, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. "Alex, I can't justify it. I can ask for your forgiveness, I can beg you to let me at least try to fix it." Alex closed his eyes for a moment, trying to organize the confusion in his mind. He wanted to scream, he wanted to express what he felt, but he knew that words, at that moment, wouldn't do justice to the abyss that existed between them. It was a charged, dense silence, filled with everything they had been and everything they would never be again. After a few minutes, he finally broke the silence. "Rachel, do you understand what you did? It's not just about the betrayal. It's about trust, about every moment I spent by your side believing that we were different. That our love was strong enough to overcome any obstacle." She nodded, visibly devastated. "I know, Alex. And that's what hurts the most. Knowing that I destroyed the very thing I loved most." He stood up, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of his own words. "I need time, Rachel. I need to understand what's left of us and if there's anything left to save." Rachel just nodded, resigned, watching as he walked out of the room, taking with him everything that was left of his shattered heart. In the days that followed, Alex kept his distance. He was looking for answers that he knew he wouldn't find so easily, but that he needed to at least try to understand the pain that consumed him. He was trying to get back into a routine, but everything seemed pointless. The small details of everyday life, which previously went unnoticed, now suffocated him, constantly reminding him of pain and disappointment. Rachel, on the other hand, remained silent. I avoided any interaction with Alex, respecting the space he needed so much. Yet every minute he spent in his own company seemed to amplify the pain of regret. She knew that even if Alex forgave her, he would never fully trust her again. It was as if he had undone something unbreakable, and now, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find a way to rebuild what he had destroyed. It was on a Sunday morning, in the midst of this heavy silence, that Rachel found a small box on the living room table. Alex had gone for a walk, and when he returned, he left the box there, hoping she would find it. When she opened the box, she found the wedding ring he had given her years before. Next to it was a short but sharp letter, written clearly and firmly. Rachel, our history was built on trust and respect, and as much as I want to, I can no longer see our relationship the same way. Every moment I spend with you now is a painful reminder of what we lost, and I know you feel the same. I no longer feel able to look at us and believe that we can rebuild something that was destroyed in such a brutal way. For everything we have experienced and for the respect that still exists between us, I wish you to find your own peace. For now, I'm looking for mine. Alex. She held the ring for a long moment as the tears finally spilled over uncontrollably. I felt that letter was the farewell I feared so much, confirmation that the possibility of reconciliation was increasingly distant. He knew it was too late, and that no matter how hard he tried, nothing could erase what he had done. In the days that followed, Alex prepared things to leave the house, looking for a new home where he could rebuild his life and find some meaning for what came next. Rachel, alone, remained amidst the remains of a story that she could never return to. The final decision hovered like a bitter but necessary certainty: it was the end. Alex moved forward with the plan to leave the past behind, never looking back. After weeks of painful silence and lonely reflections, he found a small apartment, far from any memory that could remind him of what his life with Rachel had been. It was a modest space, but enough for him to rebuild his own life, in search of something he didn't yet know what it was. In the process of moving, he felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Each box he carried represented a piece of himself that now belonged to the past. While adjusting to this new routine, Alex dedicated himself to work and his mental health. He signed up for activities he'd never had time to explore before, like sunrise walks and therapy sessions that slowly began to clear the confusing feelings that consumed him. He knew that the pain of betrayal would remain with him for a long time, but he was determined not to let it define who he would become from now on. Rachel, on the other hand, felt lost. The empty house and constant silence reminded her of what she had lost. She was trying to get her life back on track, but everything around her seemed like an echo of what had been destroyed. Mutual friends avoided commenting on Alex, as if the subject were taboo. At work, constant distractions led her to make mistakes, and the routine that once filled her days now felt like a form of punishment. Deciding to try one last time, Rachel wrote Alex a letter. She dedicated herself carefully, searching for words that would express what she could never say in person. The letter was a heartfelt confession, a profound apology, and an admission that she knew she might never see him again. He knew that any attempt at reconciliation was unlikely, but he could not help but write these words. It was his way of closing the chapter, of accepting the blame for what he had done. When Alex received the letter, he hesitated for a long time before opening it. Part of him still resisted facing any memory of what they experienced. But, after a sleepless night, he gave in to his curiosity and read each line carefully. There was a raw sincerity there, and although it didn't heal his wounds, he felt a weight lifted. Not for forgiving her completely, but for finally understanding the depth of the feelings she carried, however distorted they were. From that reading, Alex finally found the serenity necessary to move forward. He kept the letter, not out of attachment to the past, but as a reminder that each choice carries its weight and that honesty, however difficult it may be, is the foundation of any true relationship. His pain was now accompanied by a strange peace. He had done what was necessary, and his future, although still uncertain, seemed less bleak. Rachel, alone in the house that had once been their home, continued her own journey of self-discovery and regret. She knew that the love she once shared with Alex could never be rebuilt. She decided to sell the house, ending once and for all any physical connection with the memories that haunted her. The process was painful, but over time, she realized that she needed to start over and learn from the mistakes she had made. Without expectations of redemption, Rachel began to invest in her own personal development, trying to understand what led her to destroy something so important. She signed up for support groups, trying to find some kind of reconciliation with herself. He learned to accept that he couldn't go back, but that he could still rebuild his life in a way that honored the painful learning he had experienced. The emptiness in her chest remained, but she committed to living with more honesty and respect for herself and others. Years later, Alex found happiness again in a solid relationship based on trust, something he would never take for granted again. His new partner helped him rediscover love and companionship, and together, they built a life where sincerity was the basis of everything. For Alex, that phase of life was over, not as a happy memory, but as a profound and transformative learning experience. Rachel, in her own way, found a lonely peace. He never forgot Alex, but he remembered him now with respect and acceptance. Her mistakes were recorded in her history, but she knew that, to move forward, she needed to forgive herself. The fresh start was arduous, but in the end she discovered a way to become a better person, even if the price was high. Comment what you thought of this intense story full of lessons. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other impactful stories like this. And remember, this channel does not support cheating of any kind. Our goal is to expose how these acts can destroy lives and relationships.